Member for Banff Cochrane.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak this morning on Bill 1, an act to reduce school fees. Certainly when I was door knocking during the election and ever since then, school fees have been a topic that's been catching the attention of my constituents, and it's something that they're really grateful that our government is finally able to move on. I just want to begin my speech this morning talking and comparing and contrasting a little bit with what the folks in the opposition might do if the tables were turned here. You know, we've seen that the Conservative opposition, the third party now, had a chance to reduce school fees. You know, we all know that they've been in government for many decades, and under their leadership, school fees grew and grew and grew to where the point we are today, we're trying to reduce them. And even though we are doing a good job reducing them, there still remain some school fees that parents have to pay for. So we know that under their watch and under their leadership, they were just downloading those costs to families, Mr. Speaker, and we know that given the chance, they would do that again. You know, consider the official opposition. We've heard people running for various leadership races, and even the members across the aisle themselves have said publicly that they would plan to undo all of the legislation and policies that our government has put into place. So, Mr. Speaker, that includes the bill we're debating today, although it hasn't passed yet. You know, it seems to me that this is something that they've spoken about undoing. Other legislation that we've passed that they've spoken about, it was protecting communities from wildfire, Mr. Speaker.
Stop the clock, please.
Mr. Speaker, I've heard just about enough of the opposite member making allegations under 23H and I, makes allegations against a member and imputes false or unavowed motives to another member. Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear that there is nothing that this government is going to do in the next 4 years that cannot be undone. We have not specifically picked out any, in the next 2 years. There is nothing that this government, and I'll reaffirm that, there is nothing that this government is doing in their 4-year term that cannot be undone in the next election in 2019, which will be very, very happy for Albertans to hear that. We will be looking at the carbon tax in Bill 6 specifically, but for the member to impute that we will be pulling the legislation in regards to Ukrainian Day is absolutely ludicrous. Or school fees. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I don't see this as a point of order. I actually don't know what it is we're talking about here because the member wasn't particularly clear, but I believe the honourable member was simply stating his view of the facts. They obviously have a different view of the facts, Mr. Speaker. What we're talking about here is school fees. So, you know, obviously this side of the House thinks that school fees should be lower. That's why we're introducing a bill to suggest that school fees should be lower. I'm perfectly well aware that if the members opposite were elected, they could go ahead and reverse that. They have every right to dislike the legislation. They have every right to object to the legislation. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't see how that's a point of order at all.
Additional information, I've already heard, I must say I don't believe this is a point of order in this situation. An opinion is being offered. The honourable members do have in 29(2)A an opportunity to address questions and issues to the Speaker at the end, and I would encourage you to do that. Please continue.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the crankiness coming from the opposition is a good reminder about why we might want to revisit the daylight savings time and see the effects it has on the opposition. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, I know sometimes it takes people a little while to make their point, and the opposition is their master craftsmen at taking a long time to make their point. So I would appreciate the same kind of courtesy that we've extended to them by not calling points of order when they don't like what we have to say. But, Mr. Speaker, I mean, when the member just got up on the point of order, he talked about undoing protections for workers' rights, allowing Ottawa to bring in a carbon pricing scheme instead of having a Made in Alberta approach. So it goes to show, what I was saying is exactly true about what the opposition would do. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to maybe talk about some of the more positive aspects of the bill rather than how the opposition would make families pay more. I'd like to talk about leaders in my community that are working hard for school children. People like Carol Picard. She's the chair of the Canadian Rockies Public School Board. And just actually last year, she was nominated and won the award for Citizen of the Year for Canmore. So it's people like her and the people who work on their board, of course also the people who work at the Rocky View Schools Board, another board in my jurisdiction. And these people are doing amazing work for our kids. I know that they're making the best use of the dollars that are available to them to provide education for our children. And we're seeing those results, Mr. Speaker. We've got kids doing great in their test results, and also another really interesting thing that Canadian Rockies Public Schools is doing is they attract international students from overseas. So that brings in more money into the school board. And so that's kind of an innovative way that school boards are making best use of the options that they're given, and I really like to salute our school board trustees. Mr. Speaker, it's no secret, my wife and I don't have any children ourselves, and I know when I was younger, one of the things I thought to myself, just being an uninformed and maybe uneducated and learning life as I was going along. And at that time, when I was much younger, I thought to myself, why I had a mortgage, a brand new mortgage, and I thought, geez, why am I paying school fees or taxes for schools? I don't have kids. And so I thought about it more and kind of informed myself and realized that, in Canada, we have a social safety net. And we also have people that give generously through their taxes to support that social safety net. And then I realized that even without kids, I had a role to play in forming that social safety net as well. And, children that have good education, they grow up to get good jobs, and then they become people like doctors, nurses, and teachers, and people who, as I grow older, and maybe need a long-term care home one day, these are the people that will take care of me one day. So it really makes sense to me when I thought about it more deeply and how, as Canadians, we look out for one another. And the most fair way to do that is through paying taxes, and especially progressive income taxes, Mr. Speaker, not like the flat tax that these folks over here would rather have us pay, where their rich friends get off scot-free and put the burden of the taxes on everybody else.
Shame.
So it is a shame, Mr. Speaker. The Wild Rose has some pretty far-out ideas that would put the burden back on Alberta families, and that's certainly not something I would support, Mr. Speaker. Speaking about taxes, something that we like to talk about on this side of the House is that Alberta, even with carbon pricing, we still have the lowest taxes of any province in Canada, by about a $7.5 billion advantage, Mr. Speaker. So as much as they would like to drag Alberta down and talk Alberta down on the other side, on this side of the House, we know that Alberta retains its advantage.
Hear, hear.
I think that this reducing school fees program also complements and bolsters other programs that we're doing for schools, such as the school nutrition program, Mr. Speaker. And these things sort of dovetailing together. I know the school nutrition program is in a pilot stage at this point, and we're looking to see how well it's working and reinvestigate that at a later point. But these are all things that parents have to think about when they're getting their kids ready to go to school. And I think back, again, when I was younger and much less informed than I am now, when I was in high school, I always had a good lunch, and I remember kids would come around. I would get bullied when I was a kid, and people would come around and take parts of my lunch. And we would call these people vultures, Mr. Speaker. And looking back on that, that was a terrible term, because when I think about it now, looking back on those times when people would take my lunch, those were probably the kids that their parents didn't have the money to send them to school with the lunch, Mr. Speaker. And I think that's a sad fact. And probably sometimes these kids might have been bullies because they didn't know what else to do. They were hungry and they're cranky. And, thinking back about the way we would call them vultures is, I regret that nowadays, because I realize the situation they may have been in. Speaking about making things better for school children, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity a few years ago to volunteer for an organization called Stephen's Backpacks. This is a young man in Calgary. I think he might have been about 12 years old when he started this charity. He started a charity where he saw that kids didn't have school supplies when they went to school. So what Stephen did is create a charity where they would fill backpacks with school supplies and give them to less fortunate children. So I had the opportunity to go and volunteer with this group, and it was a really heartwarming experience, Mr. Speaker. Seeing everybody getting together and making it happen for those kids was great. What else, Mr. Speaker? One thing I remember also as a young child that a teacher really inspired me was, I think it was in grade 2. I was really into creative writing. My sister was a writer. My dad was an English teacher in high school, so I really enjoyed writing. And one of my teachers in grade 2 gave me a little notebook. And she said that she liked my writing so much, she wanted me to encourage me to do that more. And it was probably like a 50-cent notebook, but it's something I still remember to this day. It was pretty special. Mr. Speaker, I just also want to talk a little bit about how this government, in addition to reducing school fees, is helping build schools across the province. Coming up at the end of this month in the beautiful town of Cochrane, there's a brand new school opening, the Ranchview School. And it's pretty exciting because I know that in Cochrane, it's a rapidly growing community. It was the second fastest growing municipality in Canada, the small municipalities, according to the most recent census. I think they've grown by about 47% over the last several years. So in Cochrane, Mr. Speaker, when a school opens, like the Ranchview School opening, it actually opens at capacity because the failure of the PC governments to plan ahead for this growth that this vibrant and growing community was realizing, they made these announcements for schools, but they didn't put any funding behind it, Mr. Speaker. The Auditor General has been clear about how much they dropped the ball on that. So I'm proud that we're committing the money to also building the schools. I mean, it's great to reduce school fees, but if you don't have the schools and the teachers and the teaching assistants to go in those schools, or even the money to build them as the PCs failed to do, that's something that's important for people in the town of Cochrane, for example. I also know that in Banff, Banff Elementary School is undergoing renovation and expansion. And Banff is a very unique situation because it's a tourist town and there are a lot of service workers. There's also a really high number of folks with English as a second language in Banff, which is great. I mean, we've got people new to Canada calling Banff their home and living the Canadian dream. I mean, people from all across Canada want to come and visit Banff, and a lot of people also like to come and work there. I mean, you get to work and play in this mountain paradise. So we've got young children learning English, and we need to make sure that we're funding teachers to go in these schools, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's all well and good to say you support education as the opposition does, but you actually have to put the money behind this to hire those teachers too. You know, I know they've complained about the unemployment situation in our province, And certainly that's something we're concerned about, Mr. Speaker. We've got a jobs plan. The Minister of Economic Development and Trade is doing a fantastic job promoting our industries at home and abroad. But Mr. Speaker, if you were to follow the plans of the Wild Rose and cut funding for these crucial public programs, they'd make the unemployment situation worse, Mr. Speaker. We wouldn't have teachers in our classrooms. We wouldn't have nurses and housekeepers in our hospitals, and education assistants. So, Mr. Speaker, you can't fire people and think that's going to help the employment situation. You know, Albertans are smarter than that, and they know the Wild Rose is just full of hot air. But, Mr. Speaker, what else do I have to say here? Oh, that's one thing. Young mums in the operating room where I used to work. The operating room was a really neat place because we tended to have a lot of young staff members, and of course nursing is a primarily female-oriented position. And so a lot of these a lot of these mums having brand new babies and going on maternity leave, one of the first things that they're thinking about is, how am I going to take care of my kid? Like, they have a shift work type of job, and so they're thinking about daycare. And, Mr. Speaker, I also think that our reducing school fees also plays into our $25 a day daycare program, because it helps parents afford to take care of their kids and also send them to school. So there are all of these different costs that parents have to afford. And what we're doing on this side of the House is making life more affordable for Albertans and making a difference in the things that matter in their lives. Whereas the folks on the opposition would rather jack those fees up. So, you know, another thing about making life more affordable, those folks want to freeze their wages of these people making like $20 an hour. They want to freeze wages and impose unilateral wage freezes on workers. And that's something they actually campaigned against in the 2013 when we were having the Bill 46 debate, where the government was going to shove the wage freezes down the throats of public sector workers. Shame.